tonight's guest, and he's going to log in any minute, I believe, and he'll join us, Christian Stoinev. And if you're a fan of the television show America's Got Talent, you might know Christian. Christian and Scooby, the little chihuahua, or Christian and Percy, who also have kind of taken over not only AGT, but more specifically a lot of the NBA halftime shows over the course of the last few seasons. And Christian's got a really interesting story that I thought was going to be very intriguing for the audience. So Christian is here. I see that he just logged on, and I'm going to click on his name here. We're going to add him to the mix, and we'll get going right away. Go live with Christian. So here we go. I'm going to rock. And there is a basketball tie-in here with Christian beyond just him performing on NBA halftime shows. There he is right there.
How's it going, Eric?
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
So,
it's the first time I'm joining an Instagram live, so I was unsure how to do this, but
all right. Well, and listen, I know you and I were already chatting, over text earlier today. The fact that you just launched in the last couple of days your own podcast as well. So whether this is like an audio podcast or if you end up doing this kind of video thing, you're gonna get real familiar with this in a hurry, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to learn. We've been in quarantine, so I guess I actually told my girlfriend the other day, I was like, man, I feel really stressed without stress, like just sitting here not having anything to do. So I was like, I need to give myself some project or something because it's like driving me crazy. So the podcast idea had been in my mind for a while, and I've always wanted to do a podcast with somebody else. But I was just like, she didn't really want to start it with me. She was just like, I'm not that comfortable, but I'll be a guest on one of them. So I was like, okay. I'll start it alone and interview some people. And, we've talked, but I went to college and my degree's in broadcast journalism. So I was kind of feeling like I could interview people and everyone's got their story. So that would be pretty awesome. So yeah, I started that podcast. It doesn't have a title yet. I'll figure that out soon, but, I'm going to record another one tomorrow, with my best friend who's actually also a halftime performer. He does a German wheel act and ask him some questions and all that. So,
see, I thought this was going to be interesting to chat with you because, as I said to folks, I'm obviously wanted to talk to fellow broadcasters, writers in the industry, whether they cover basketball or hockey, football, baseball, whatever sport. But I wanted to reach out to entertainers, to musicians, to actors, to performers, folks that I've been able to meet over the course of my 20 plus years in the NBA. And I find your story interesting. I mean, listen, I would have found your story interesting just in the sense of having been on, one of the top reality television shows and who you've interacted with in terms of your performances all the years, let alone then the fact that you're now in sort of the NBA world with these halftime shows. But if we go back to the beginning, I think that's where, to me at least, your story is even more interesting. And that's why I wanted to bring you on because, folks, if you haven't met Christian, you're going to obviously know him now. You're going to follow him on Instagram if you don't already. And I know we're probably dragging in some of your followers on our chat too, the folks that see you live, and now they're wondering who the hell I am. Tell the folks that are watching right now that haven't heard your story that you grew up. And I mean, it's funny, Christian, side note here. I just watched, and I know it's a fictitious or a fictional movie, but I just watched last weekend or a week and a half ago, Dumbo, the new, the remake, the live animated version. And, all about growing up in the circus and a family in the circus. And that literally is what you did from a young age at 5-6 years old, growing up in the circus, living on the road for the first, 12, almost 15 years of your life.
Yeah. So, I actually didn't see the newer version of Dumbo, but when I was a kid, I did see the old school version. But I grew up into a circus family, and we grew up traveling for the first 7 years. I was born in Florida, but then my family was in Mexico until I was about 7 years old. My mom's side of the family they had the oldest circus in the whole country of Mexico, and so we were there until I was 7. Then we came over to the States, and pretty much I grew up in New York City. We were on a show there called the Big Apple Circus, and at first my dad was the one that was performing, and I was just 7 years old or 8 years old at the time. But then by the time I was 13, I was in the show as well, and then actually my dad had taken on more of a management position, and my mom as well. So that's where my performing experience and career really continued on. I had performed when I was younger, but this was the most consistent performing I had done. So from age 12 or so until I was 17, I was performing on this show that traveled mainly around New York City. And life was different. Going to school was different. The people around were different, and cultures that you were surrounded by were different. You always hear about Toronto being such a melting pot of people from different cultures, and that's kind of how the circus life is as well. Acrobats that are coming in, and performers and singers and dancers from all around the world. So there's a lot. I speak 3 languages, and that's mostly due to the fact that my mom's Mexican and my dad's Bulgarian. But I can understand pretty much French and Russian and Italian because of that experience. And even like I said, going to school, I was pretty much the only student, and so I kind of just had to. All the pressure was on me. I couldn't fall asleep in class or anything, and I think that helped me learn more of the stuff. But it just made it tougher on me when I say wanted to be part of a sports team, or even going on field trips. There wasn't. I mean, it would just be my parents being the chaperones, I guess. Yeah.
So let me go back a bit then, and I don't want to get too repetitive with the great details you just gave, but if we kind of go back to the young age, what was that like then for a youngster being born into a family where your mother's a circus performer, an aerialist, your dad is a circus performer, from Bulgaria, from Mexico, respectively, as you mentioned, and you're a kid, and you're not going to grade school, you're not going to elementary school, you are on the road, you are living the circus life, you don't have a chance to, as you said, play on sports teams or be kind of the quote-unquote regular kid going to school. Your life is on the road, and your life is around the rest of the performers and within that entertainment industry.
So that at the time was normal life. So most of my friends and people we grew up around were in the same boat. So I never kind of got to see how unique that was until now, obviously as an adult, just kind of seeing how that is so different. So at the time, it was totally normal. Like my parents, I had them around me all day pretty much, and they would just leave for a couple, maybe an hour to go get ready, do the show, and then they'd be right back home. We traveled in a, trailer, which is pretty much like home on wheels. That was normal life. Even when we would travel, sometimes if we traveled from New York to Atlanta and you didn't do the whole drive in one day, you'd be parked at a Walmart parking lot because it's 24 hours. So, they're not going to kick you out for parking there. And, Dad turns on the generator, and that provides the power in the moving house. And that's kind of where you stay for the night. So there was a lot of that just became so normal. And even I feel like now that I've, gotten away from that, I've realized how that was totally like so unlike anything other people have experienced. And for me, not to necessarily connect it to basketball, but the few friends that I had that weren't circus related were because I would go to the parks and play basketball. One of my good friends that we met in Rhode Island was because I would go to the park and play basketball. And I remember this story to this day. We were shooting around, and we kind of became friends. I think I saw him a couple days that week at the park, and then he was. We were probably 13 or so, and he was like, "Where do you live?" And I was like, "Right over there." And because he was like, "Where's your mom and dad?" And I was like, "Oh, they're at home." And he was like, "Where do you live?" And then I was like, "Over there." And I'm pointing to a circus tent, and he's like, "What do you mean? Like, where over there?" And I was like, "At the circus." And for him, he was like, "What?" And he was so thrown off by that. And so, then eventually I invited his family to the show. They came to the show. They met my parents, and it kind of became routine every time we would travel. They kind of went back and forth between Boston and Rhode Island. They had like their summer house and their regular house, and they'd invite us over one of the days for dinner at their house. I would have sleepovers with them sometimes, and vice versa. Mike would come over with us sometimes and travel for like a week with us, and his parents give him that experience of traveling and that life. So it was cool. It was just. But that's really where I started being like, oh, wow, there's like other stuff going on around me that's not circus related.
I mean this respectfully when I ask this question. did you ever have the choice? Like, did your parents ever, whether it be at 5, 7, 10, 12, whatever age it was, did they ever say, do you want this? Or was it even a choice because that's what they did and they were providing for the family, so there was no choice?
Yeah, I mean, I take that with complete respect, obviously. But yeah, no, there kind of was no choice because my parents didn't really know any different. So that was just so normal. It was your kid growing up in the circus. And I guess where really my parents made, I don't want to say the ultimate sacrifice because it's so normal for everyone. But for my parents, it wasn't normal to send your kid to college. So once I was, performing and I was about 16 or so, and my teachers were starting to ask my parents, would you be interested in going to college? Every friend that my parents had probably was telling them, like, no, what are you going to go to college for? He's already performing. He's already making money. This is just a career already. Like, leave it. And I don't know, maybe it was, I really don't know what it was. Probably the lack of education that my parents had. My parents barely finished high school. And so for them, I think they really wanted that. And they really, especially my mom, I know, really pushed for my education. And so she was like, no, like, you should go to college. And even going to college was still kind of, I would say, biased for them because I ended up still going to college at a school where I was part of a circus program, which we can touch on later. But that, at least, they were already planning on me to go to college, and that just made that transition way easier even for them because the other acrobats were probably like, he could be making money right now. It's kind of like a kid that when guys were allowed to go into the NBA straight out of high school, go make the money now. But yeah, it was just kind of no choice because there wasn't really anything else out there. And so at least college, in my parents, I'm sure in their eyes, it wasn't that they were thinking he's going to go to college and never do the circus again. I always kind of like joke with them, but I'll always be like, part of you guys would be really disappointed if in college I decided to retire performing and become a journalist. And they always are like, no, but I know deep down, like, it would hit their pride a little bit because, there's a little bit of pride there when the fact that I'm still performing and stuff. They love that because that's their passion. That's what they grew up doing. But that my parents kind of gave me that option to try something different. And that was really, I guess, where, like you said, there was a choice. But growing up, that was kind of like, at least you'll have this circus career and we'll see what else you make out of college or wherever else.
Now, was there ever any question as to whether you would have, I mean, listen, you ultimately decided on Illinois State. It could have been another college or another university, I assume, but was there ever any question as to whether you might have the marks, the grades to get in because of the fact that you didn't have traditional schooling, or, in spite of your own ambition, in spite of the non-traditional education, you were still smart enough, strong enough to have the requirements needed in order to get into that post-secondary?
So my high school years, technically I was enrolled at a school in New York called the School for Young Performers, which is a school program that like kid actors enroll and they follow that curriculum. And then I just had teachers that traveled with us that made sure I was on top of that, following that curriculum. So you could almost think of it as like a private school that was just very private for me kind of thing. But there were other kids in the school, and there was actually a big semi-truck kind of decked out inside with desks and stuff instead of like an empty warehouse looking truck. But the grades, I think I had a C here and there. And I know that my grades weren't good enough to get me into the University of Florida because that's where I wanted to go, actually. Because I remember going, my parents also, it's funny now because obviously things turned out fine, but they had no clue what we were doing when I was applying to colleges. I applied, they probably spent over $1,500 because I must have applied to like 15 different colleges. My dad was like, apply to Harvard and NYU and schools that I even was like, I don't want to go to Harvard, and I'll never get in and stuff like that. But I don't think the fact that I was the only student really affected that because I don't even know actually if the colleges knew that. I think they just saw my transcript came from the School for Young Performers. So I don't think they knew I was like a circus kid. I could have been an actor or something else.
What ultimately led you to decide on journalism, broadcast journalism? I mean, was this just something that was a passion for you from a young age? Because, I mean, again, as you said, you're already in performance. Mm-hmm. You know, you already have something to fall back on, but at the same time, you're deciding that, hey, I want to get into broadcast journalism. Yeah. What brought you down that path?
That I loved my love for sports. It really was my love for sports. Had I not been in a circus growing up, I do think like my passion was always sports, and I would have loved to play basketball on the team of the school or football, but I never got that, like you said, and I kind of had no choice, and I didn't have that option. Circus just kind of was my sport, you could say, and so growing up, I wanted to be part of some kind of sports team, and I never could. And I even joke around with a lot of people that are like, remember this cartoon? And I'm like, the only cartoon I knew was Hey Arnold. And then my childhood was over because once I found ESPN or whatever, I was right. Hooked. And I didn't, like, by age 12, I don't think I was watching cartoons anymore. I was watching, like, basketball. Even at age 10, I remember watching the Kobe and the Suns. Like, that was like a rivalry. And it was like, Kobe, I remember watching games on TNT and thinking, like, will he have 50 tonight and stuff like that? And it was, like, past my bedtime because the games on the East Coast started at, like, 10:30 back then. But it was definitely that love for sports and all the time. And the great Stuart Scott was someone that I always remember. I don't know why it took me this long, but I think I was in high school and I was, like, struggling, falling asleep, and I turned the pillow over, and then it was, like, cool. And I was like, that's what he meant. That's what he means. As cool as the other side of the pillow. And I was like, I got it now. And so, like, I don't know. I really, that's really what kind of got me hooked. And I knew I wanted to do something related to sports. And once my teachers it was a lot of help from my teachers, because a lot of times, my parents wouldn't even know that there was a degree called broadcast journalism. They probably were just kind of like, you should go to college. What do you want to be, an architect? Or, it was just very, like, broad career paths. But my teachers were like, oh, you really like sports. Like, have you thought about this or commentating or whatever? And they kind of helped push me in the right direction.
Now, again, I find this fascinating because of just at a fairly young age, how many twists and turns your life takes from growing up in the circus to being a part of it, to being a performer, to then, deciding I'm still going to leave the circus behind, at least temporarily, or at least incorporate it into my education, go to university. But now you come out of university, you study broadcast journalism, but yet you decide, hold on, I'm not quite sure if I want to pursue that yet, even though I now have that degree. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back to the circus life, or at least the performance life, and try that out for a bit. And all of a sudden, and you tell me if my chronology is wrong, but essentially AGT starts taking off for you. Then that leads to obviously other openings on other shows and putting yourself out there. Then all of a sudden the door opens in terms of NBA halftime shows. Now you're doing college games and NHL games, and you're running the circuit now. And this has kind of become your life. I mean, for you to make those decisions to go this way, then to come back that way, it's credit to you, I think. And certainly then now you've got this, oh yeah, by the way, I still got in my back pocket broadcast journalism if at any point I want to go back to it.
Yeah, I think the most important thing I took away from, I guess aside from the fact that I learned my skills that I use as my career now, but the thing I took away from being a kid in the circus world is that you kind of have to mature really quickly. And, I was working already at age 13. And even though it was just right there, like near my house, that I would have to go to the tent to perform, I had a responsibility, and I had to be there on time. And I had to, warm up and stretch and all these kind of things that just set this kind of discipline for you. So, by the time I was 17, I already had the conversations with my teachers about what my career path was going to be. So, once I got to college, I already, during like Christmas break, Scooby didn't live with me because I was in the dorms, but I would fly home, and my parents, I think at the time, were in Mexico, and pick Scooby up and then fly to New York. And this is all about, and I started college when I was 17. So,
and I'm going to jump in for 1 second. For folks that don't know, Scooby's the OG, right? The original, the Chihuahua that you were doing a lot of your shows with.
Yes. So the act Christian and Scooby debuted when I was 13 years old. So by the time I was 17, I was already in college, and then I turned 18 during that Christmas break. But during that Christmas break, I would go home, pick up Scooby, and then go to New York, and there was a venue there that I would perform at, and I would perform there for like the 3 weeks during break, and then go back home and drop Scooby off with my parents, and then go back to school. And I would make my money in those 3 weeks that, you know, would be my semester money. Over summer, I would look for gigs. And even when I was in college, I would look for gigs that I would be able to drive up to Chicago a couple hours and perform by myself and make some money that I could use for, you know, whatever us college kids use on the weekends, you know. But I'm just saying it allowed me to kind of have this responsibility, this discipline that I think I took from way back being a 13-year-old kid in the circus and having those responsibilities to take care of. And after that, like you said, the timeline's pretty accurate. During college, I would do gigs here and there. Over the summers, I even did a tour without the act being Christian and Scooby. It was just by myself doing handstands. And so eventually, once I was a senior, I just kind of made that choice where I was like, all right, I'm performing so far, I'm like threading water, and I'm still in college. So I think if I apply myself full time to this, I could make this a pretty successful thing, especially because the shtick with the dog is really working. So as soon as pretty much I graduated, and maybe towards the end is when I started just kind of, you know, grinding and just emailing and just trying to find opportunity after opportunity. And again, same thing. Luckily, when I was a kid, I was able to go to Madison Square Garden to see the Celtics play the Knicks. And because one of the acts that was doing halftime knew my parents, and they knew I loved the NBA. So they were like, oh, we'll take them with us to the game. And I remember like seeing it and being so close. I took a photo with like Nate Robinson, and Sebastian Telfair was on the Celtics. And so it was those little experiences that kind of planted the seed. One of the performers that was on the show, the Big Apple Circus with us, he did a lot of halftime shows as well. And I specifically remember when he went to Toronto, I was like, oh my God, like that's my favorite team. And he came back and brought me like a little Raptors flag and things like that that stuck with me. And that's kind of what made me think of that. And so, like I said, once I graduated, there was a lot of just kind of, you know, trying to get somebody give you an opportunity. And the Minnesota Lynx were the first team to give me that chance. My man Aaron Dodge put me on there, and I just said, if you don't mind, if you like what we do, would you mind sending an email to other like people that do the same as you, but with other teams?
Yeah.
So hopefully it can, you know, kind of be a domino effect. And he did that for me. Next thing you know, my NBA debut was at Madison Square Garden. So it kind of came full circle. And as that was starting to take off, I did America's Got Talent, and then obviously we had our finals run. So from there, everything kind of blew up even more. And that's the thing about this career, though. Even still to this day, you just can never get too comfortable. You know, there's always people that you respect because you know they're also on that path of trying to get there. And so once you're there, the hardest part is like probably like in basketball, what makes the players, you know, great is that consistency. And so me, I'm always, even though by now you could kind of make the case that I've established myself within the NBA as a halftime performer, you know, I'm still always trying to change things or adapt, or, you know, even now I have Milo, the younger pup, and he's learned how to dunk. And so my mind's always trying to improve and get better. And I think that all stems right back to the beginning, again, like I said, of just growing with that ambition and that sense of discipline and responsibility.
All right, I'm going to put the performance, the halftime shows, the NBA circuit, all that stuff, everything. I'm going to put that on hold for a second because I want to at least address part of the story you just mentioned, going to Madison Square Garden, and you said that you asked somebody to bring you back a Raptor flag, and here you are wearing the Raptor hat. So how does a kid from Sarasota who's living on the road and traveling all over the place and up in New York City and living in the circus life and everything else and going to school in Chicago, and how does a kid your age, from where you're from where your family's from, end up being a hardcore Toronto Raptors fan? Tell that story.
All right. We also have to add that the team wasn't very good during that time. So
yes. Trust me, I know.
So for me, I just remember that Vince got me. Like, Vince Carter was obviously, you know, half man, half amazing and everything, and he was all the highlights. And he is kind of what made me a Raptors fan. Once I started watching basketball, and at the time also, they almost never showed a national TV game with the Raptors. And I always was like, damn, this sucks. And I would like find somehow, probably some illegal streaming online to watch the game or something. And I don't know what it was that just made me such a big Raptor fan and really fall in love with the team, other than it was Vince just being so fun to watch. And even just hope, like watching the game and being like, will he get 50 tonight? And it was more so about Vince than it was about the team. But obviously, once you start liking that, then once you're brought in, you start learning about other players and their stories and all this kind of stuff. And so once I was hooked onto Vince Carter, next thing you know, when I would go play at the park, I had a little wristband over here on my left side because I wanted to be like Morris Peterson or whatever it was, So it was just learning from, not learning, but just, in a way, learning other players' stories and the story about the team and the fact that we struggled. So, like, having a big-time win, that underdog mentality and having a big-time win was, like, super rewarding, and it was awesome, and it put me in a great mood for the rest of the day. I would even sometimes, like the Kobe 81-point game, I'll always remember. We were in Florida. My parents had gotten a house there. I watched that game through FoxSports.com, just watching the play-by-play. Like the written play-by-play. It wasn't video. I wasn't watching the video. And I remember, like, it was probably the third quarter, I was like, he has 60. I was like, this is a glitch. And then I went to, like, NBA.com or ESPN.com to find the box score there. And it was just, like, watching Kobe. And I was like, what is going on here? So, like, that's just how my fandom started. And my first NBA game that I attended, so I was a little bit younger when I started liking Vince and the Raptors. My mom took me when we were in Orlando for my birthday. My parents surprised me with tickets to a Magic Toronto game. And the Raptors won, and they were underdogs because the Magic had T-Mac at the time. And I remember Jerome, I don't know if Jerome Williams had a career high in points or rebounds or both, but he had like a huge game. And that stood out to me. So take it full circle, Vince Carter. Then obviously we drafted Bosh. So then Bosh was my favorite player. The number 4 became my favorite number because my birthday also falls on the 4. So I just found a way to connect the two. And then after that, once we got DeMar, once DeRozan was kind of the star of the team, he's someone that even now he's been gone 2 seasons and he's still my favorite player. I think I just have really like his loyalty is something that really stuck with me, and I really respected that, and I really valued that. And even though maybe his defense wasn't the best or whatever you want to make, it mattered for me how much he fell in love with the city of Toronto, because it was kind of how I started just falling in love with the team as well. And by now, I'm a big-time Raptors fan, and I've stuck to it. I've been a Raptors fan, and since my mom was the one that brought me to my first Raptors game, now when we were in the finals for Game 6, I was kind of going through tough decisions because I was like trying to predict which game and what was going to happen, and I wanted to go to Game 5, but the tickets were so expensive, so I was definitely bummed that they didn't win, Game 5. But then I was like, all right, they're going to be in Oakland. This could be it. This is my chance. And my mom and dad were visiting me at the time here in Vegas, so I told my mom we're going. And so I was there with my mom at Game 6, crying tears of joy. My hands were shaking, and it was the best. It was really like the team's been around for 25 years, and I've been a fan for about 20 of those. And so that was just so rewarding to go from, the team, like I said, not doing so well, and the draft being like 1 year or two. Sorry that I'm going on, but
no, it's good.
One of the drafts, it was the year that we drafted Kareem Rush. I lied to my dad, and I told him my wrist was really hurting because I didn't want to practice. And I was like, my wrist hurts. I think we should take the day off. So he was like, all right. And I had my buddy come over, and we were watching the draft, and I think it was just the hype was on Kareem Rush or something. And when we drafted him, I remember getting up like cheering, and it was like a movie because when I got up cheering, my dad walked in, and I was like, oh no. And so then in my head, I think I just was like, and like faking like my wrist hurt so bad, but it was just to watch the draft. So when your team isn't that good, I think like the draft becomes kind of the highlight and all that kind of stuff. So and trade deadline and all, and the free agents. I remember the free agent period when they signed Jose Calderon as well, and all that kind of stuff. So those definitely stick out for me.
Well, there's a couple things that stand out there, and I want to mention. I've done this a couple times now on the first 2 episodes as well. Just for everybody that's watching, first of all, thank you for tuning in, and I've found that as much as I want to try and incorporate some comments, some questions, whatever else, it's difficult if I'm trying to maintain eye contact with you, at least through the camera, to then be doing this and looking down and reading and trying to see what other people are saying. So I appreciate everybody that's watching. If I can kind of scan quickly, I'll try to incorporate some stuff, but whether it's Mo or Renee or Jordan or Kevin, other folks that are watching, thank you for tuning in. Thanks very much. Christian, what really stands out of everything you just said is you can tell how much of a fan you are because the number of times that you said we. Anybody that says we when talking about their team, the team they cheer for, you're a hardcore fan when you say we. And I think the other thing that certainly shows how much of a fan you are is that you're shouting out the Kareem Rush draft. I mean, if we're talking Kareem Rush and Chris Jeffries and other guys like that, you're talking to a hardcore fan that's damn near a day oneer when it comes to the Raptors.
Yeah, because even when Kawhi came over, I was like, oh, anybody that has a Bashan Leonard jersey could rock that now. Because I'm pretty sure you wore number 2 as well.
Yeah.
So I was like, there you go. So so that sticks out. I definitely, I have a terrible memory, but when it comes to the Raptor stuff, I pretty much remember.
So you mentioned Vince and Morris Peterson and Chris Bosh, DeMar DeRozan, Morris Peterson, the Jerome Williams. The list goes on of the guys you shouted out and the guys that you've been a fan of over the years. How many of those guys have you had a chance to meet, to talk to because of now where your life has taken you within the NBA circles and doing halftime shows for, I don't know, have you done every team in the league now or how many teams? Do you know?
Probably most every team. There's 5 probably that I haven't done.
All right, so have you had a chance to meet most of, or a couple, or what have your interactions been like? I'm sure you've had to meet a bunch of them.
Yeah, actually, all the ones you just mentioned, Vince, Morris, DeMar, I've met them all actually, and meeting Vince and Morris Peterson was now through their media days. Actually, when Mo Pete, I believe he was working. I don't know if it was who he was working. TSN maybe was he?
TSN. That's all right. We'll mention TSN. It's all good.
No, but I didn't know if he was working there or for another Canadian TV network. But when the Indiana series was going on a couple of years ago, I met him there. And I took my brother to that game, so I just had my brother and him take a photo, and it's all really quick interactions. But actually looking back on it, was pretty disrespectful of me. But the Pelicans had signed me They had brought me in to do a halftime show, and they were playing the Raptors. And my first year as a halftime performer, I was 21, so I was pretty starstruck, and I was pretty much like, these are my idols, and these players are, I haven't, if anything, I've gained more respect for these guys throughout the years and being so close to games, because I've realized that this is their job and this is their profession, and how good they are at handling being idols for people through their normal day-to-day lives and job for them. So, but my first year, I was very much starstruck, and so I went to New Orleans for the Pelicans game, and I brought my DeMar DeRozan jersey and my Amir Johnson jersey, and I put them in my backpack. And during pregame or before the game started, I was over there warming up, and Dwight Bikes was there. We had a good conversation about our dogs and stuff like that. And then Landry Fields came by, and I was chatting with Landry, and this was rude of me, and I'm sorry, Pelicans, that I did this, but I asked Landry if he could ask Amir and DeMar to sign these jerseys for me. And so he actually was like, yeah, for sure. So he grabbed the jerseys, he went in the locker room, and he came back with his jersey signed. And then when DeMar was even finishing up his warm-up, like I said, he's still my favorite player. So at the time, he was definitely my favorite player also. And he ran by, and I was kind of like, DeMar, can I get a photo? And I clearly thought he just ignored me because he was it seemed like he was late. His warm-up went too long or something.
Right.
He kept running, and he just did a circle and kept running right back towards me and was like, let's do it. And so then I took the photo with him and, with the jersey that Landry had him sign for me. And so that was just really cool. And so a lot of them have been quick interactions like that. And then after game 2 of the Miami series, I think it was 3 years ago now, My brother and my mom, we drove up the 8 hours. I was doing the halftime show, and instead of flying, I asked the Raptors if I could just drive